Okay, so welcome everyone. It's lovely to see everyone here today. Welcome to St. Catherine's and welcome to this talk on ASEAN, which is being co-hosted by the Malay World Studies Research Network and also the Centre for Geopolitics in Cambridge. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Liana Chua. I'm a social anthropologist. I'm a fellow here at CATS. And I also have the great pleasure of convening the Malay World Studies Research Network and Seminar Series. So if you're interested at all in what happens in the maritime Southeast Asia region, broadly defined, this is a network and a series of talks where experts, as well as students and just interested participants from around the region or who work in the region come together, have a chat, share research findings, and just reflect on big issues facing maritime Southeast Asia today. So if you are interested, come and say hi and have a chat with me after this talk. But today, more importantly, I'm absolutely delighted to be joining forces with my colleagues from the Centre for the Centre for Geopolitics to co-host what should be a very timely and very insightful talk by Dr. Sufian Jusoh, who is Professor of International Trade and Investment, as well as Director of the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies at University Kebangsaan Malaysia. So that's the National University of Malaysia. Sufian has extensive legal training. He is, in fact, a barrister at law of Lincoln's Inn. And he's also had a very long and illustrious career in government and policy, where he shaped investment law and policy across various global contexts, but particularly across various settings in Asia. Sufian has also been a consultant to various international bodies, including the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the World Trade Organization. But today he's going to be focusing on a very specific body, namely ASEAN, and the particular geo-economic challenges that it faces as it works towards its Vision 2045. So Sufian, it's wonderful to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to what you're going to tell us. But before we move on, I also want to introduce our chair for this evening's session. And this is Professor Bill Hurst, or William Hurst, Bill Hurst? Bill, let's go with Bill. Okay. Who is currently the Zhonghua Professor of Chinese Development at the Faculty for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, and also co-director of the Indo-Pacific and Global Strands at the Centre for Geopolitics. Bill is rather unusual in that he has done long-term fieldwork and research in both China and Indonesia, with a specific focus on political economy, social movements, labor politics, and processes of policy and political change. So I think he's one of the academics who is best placed in Cambridge to actually engage with Dr. Sufian on the issues that he's going to discuss today. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation that ensues. So welcome, Bill. Welcome to Sufian. And I think I'll leave you to take things away now.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank Liana and also my colleague Haris. Both have worked tirelessly to make this session happen. I think we have been planning this for months. And I would like to also thank Bill for chairing the session afterwards. Right. I don't know what to say. I mean, first, I think the order of the day. Yeah? We will try to have more conversation rather than a one-way traffic presentation. So I will speak about maybe 30 minutes, 35 minutes or so on the importance of various geo-economic challenges. And then we will have more conversation. So the issue is very important to us, Malaysia, because we are chairing ASEAN in 2025. And our institute, the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies, have been tasked by the government of Malaysia to assist with the substantive part of the ASEAN Chairmanship, and also to prepare the new work plan for the ASEAN community, which is called the ASEAN Vision 2045, which is a very long-term vision. The previous vision was ASEAN Vision 2025, which was launched in 2015. It's a short vision, 10-year vision, but now we are going for a 25-year vision, 20-year vision, and in a very uncertain world coming up. So I would probably spend like the next 10 minutes just introducing a bit about ASEAN, and then maybe the next 20 to 35 minutes afterwards talking about 2 or 3 issues which I think would be of interest. Among others, we are talking about the Indo-Pacific. Bill is the expert on this. And then I would also like to speak about Myanmar, not about the Rohingya or about the humanitarian crisis, but rather go deeper into the geopolitical and geo-economic issues facing ASEAN resulting from Myanmar. I spent many years in Myanmar. First, I went there in 2012, sent by ASEAN to look into the liberalization of certain economic activities. And then in 2014, I was roped in by the World Bank to advise the Burmese government on the liberalization of the investment activities. So we prepared the investment policy and also the investment law, which started with during the last military government, and then transitioned towards the NLD government under Aung San Suu Kyi, and then we unfortunately had to stop because of the coup d'etat in February 2021. So that's a kind of introduction. So as many people or many of us are aware, ASEAN was established in 1967, consisting of 10 member states now, and we are waiting for Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste has applied to become a full member, and they still have about 67 different lines to complete. But then ASEAN is not the EU. Even if they may not complete the whole 67 different lines in the accession process, but Malaysia is pushing very hard for Timor-Leste to be accepted into the fold. I mean, in the EU, it's always about the economics, but in ASEAN, everything is all about politics. So that's why we accepted, or we actually pushed for the Indo-Chinese countries to join in the 90s, and then Myanmar in 1997, just to get everybody into the fold. So ASEAN, as we know, started as a political organization, or rather political grouping in 1967, and slowly becoming, focusing more into the economic side. We started with the Bangkok Declaration on the 8th of August 1967. At that time, we had so much issues at hand. One was the proliferation of the communism in the Indochina area. So everyone was worried about what would happen to us. There was something called the thought like we would be falling one by one into the sphere of communism. So then we moved into expansion between 1977 to 1997, and in between ASEAN started to look into the economic side by first agreeing on the ASEAN Free Trade Area in 1994, right before the launching of the World Trade Organization. And then the organization became an international organization with a constitution in the form of ASEAN Charter, which was launched in 2007 and ratified in 2008. So then the community was launched in 2015 during the last Malaysia's chairmanship, and now we are looking towards ASEAN Community Vision 2045, which will be launched next year in Malaysia again. And why is it 2045? We had a lot of discussion on this. I had the benefit of sitting in the eminent person group for the new vision, and we had a long chat among ourselves, argument even internally, and say, look, 10 years is a lot better than 20. But somehow or other, last year, during the Indonesia chairmanship, many of the ASEAN leaders then were new. Anwar Ibrahim just became the Prime Minister. We tried to brief our leaders, but they were new. They were like engrossed with the influence of Jokowi. Jokowi managed to convince that the new vision should be ending in 2045 in conjunction with the Indonesia Emas 2045, which is like the 100-year anniversary of Indonesia, where they intend to become a high-income nation. So ASEAN is not the EU, and neither EU should be replicated in ASEAN. We have 3 different communities. The most famous one now is the ASEAN Economic Community. Another one is ASEAN Political Security and ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community. These 3 different groups make life so difficult for us. Even people like me who work internally within the high eminent person and within the planning group, how do you talk to each other? Sometimes they are lost in translation, sometimes they are lost in terms of getting lower in priorities. And every year we have thousands of meetings. For example, in Malaysia's chairmanship next year, we are going to have a minimum of 270 meetings in 1 year. So there are more meetings than any calendar year for ASEAN. So it's going to be difficult. So we have ASEAN Charter, which like provides the legal personality and basically some principles like respect for independence, territorial integrity, and the most difficult one facing us now is the double-edged sword of non-interference in internal affairs of another ASEAN member state. So this is the one that is driving us crazy over Myanmar. How are we going to interfere, or not interfere, but intervene in the Myanmar issue because of this non-interference principle in the ASEAN Charter? So we have other issues like, or other principles like adherence to rules towards integration, driving the market economy. Another important thing is the centrality of ASEAN, what we call it ASEAN centrality, which we will discuss later. And of course, there is the unwritten rule, which is called the ASEAN way. ASEAN has its own way of doing things through what is called the ASEAN way, where everything has to be by convention, agreed by consensus. So we Southeast Asian people, we do not like to go to courts. We are not a very litigious society. So everything should go by way of negotiation or mediation, and that is the ASEAN way of doing things. Economically, we have recovered quite well after COVID, although the intra-ASEAN trade and intra-ASEAN investment are still within the range of 8 to 12% of the total. And China, if you look at the left-hand side of the slide, the United States is the largest export destination of ASEAN, and some of ASEAN member states are also in that group. So, for example, Malaysia and Singapore are the 2 largest export destinations from ASEAN to another ASEAN states. But if we take into account the both total trade, import and export, China is by far the largest trading partner of the 10 member states. And we have a lot of unfinished business coming up. Although we are planning towards ASEAN 2045, but we still have a lot of things needed to be completed. So it's going to be tough. We only have like 2 months to go. And coming in November, although the handover officially will start in January 2025, but meetings will start in Malaysia in November and December this year. So we still have a lot of things, and the biggest issues including the digitalization. We have the negotiation on digital economy framework, which is not moving very fast. Global value chain, good regulatory practice. Some member states are not really moving fast enough to adopt the rule of law and good regulatory practice and sustainable economic policy. So all this will be carried forward into the 2045 plan. So moving towards 2045, we are looking into various issues, which some of them are burning issues for ASEAN. Some of them are common issues throughout the world, such as migration, aging society. Malaysia and Singapore and Thailand are becoming aging societies. But some are still young, like Laos or Cambodia. The newer ASEAN member states are younger than us. But at the same time, we also have the demand or the pull from non-ASEAN partners like Japan or even Germany. They come to ASEAN looking for our experts to come and help them with their aging society. So they want replacement not internally, but from our part of the world to help them. So that leads to the question of migration, poverty issues. Because of the gap, we have one of the richest countries in the world in the form of Singapore. The GDP per capita is going to be more than $100,000. And compared to Myanmar, which is having something like 1,200, maybe coming up to 3,000 if everything goes well. So the gap is like 95,000 US dollars in terms of GDP per capita, plus other forms of infrastructure. We are facing same issues like climate change, like any other parts of the world. It's real. We cannot predict rains anymore. Monsoon sometimes comes earlier than expected. Green policies, moving towards renewable energy, which is sometimes can be challenging. You know, you have renewable biofuel from palm oil, so we have a question of whether you want to produce renewable energy from palm oil, or you want to have the same land for food, or you want to have a lot more forests to cater towards the global needs. Food security is a big issue. During COVID, some of the ASEAN member states stopped exporting rice to other member states. So we are looking into the challenge of food security. Innovation, most of ASEAN member states are technology adopters and not technology frontrunners. The only one which is generally technology frontrunner is Singapore. Even then, more than 80% of all patents in Singapore are foreign owned and not owned by Singaporeans, but they are based in Singapore. So we have development gap, as I mentioned earlier. Digital infrastructure need to be accelerated. And then, of course, we live in a world where no one trusts the international system. I mean, it's very difficult to trust. You go to the WTO, the negotiation takes forever. So we ended up having more bilateral or regional free trade agreements. You go to the United Nations, no one can agree on anything. So it's becoming a bit more frustrated with the situation. And we have a situation where internal and external parties are jockeying for global norms and power within the region, which we will discuss in a while. We have Indonesia, for example, the largest economy in the region, which is also looking to move towards G20 and OECD. And then at the same time, we have China and the USA who are trying to play their games within Southeast Asia. So we are looking into narrowing the development gap, addressing the human capital development and seamless mobility, increasing the regulatory reform into the region, enhancing productivity, building on food security integration, climate investment and financing, increasing responsible business, circular economy, moving towards green technology, EV, although EV is very much at the moment dominated by the Korean and the Chinese car manufacturers. And then the biggest question, of course, is how do we move from being technology adopters to become technology frontrunners, especially with the AI, semiconductor, and these newer technologies. Okay, so I would like to move further into the bigger questions, like instead of just discussing the boring things about how ASEAN looks like, we want to look into how ASEAN should address the elephants in the room. So we have a long list of issues, like how do we promote ASEAN centrality, meaning getting everybody to discuss the same thing and agreeing on having a consensus of an ASEAN position over global issues. Leadership, we have, I think, now the most senior persons in town are basically the Sultan of Brunei and Anwar Ibrahim. But Anwar Ibrahim is pushing himself further to the front by portraying his leadership. And the rest are either, I think they are newer or younger, not just in terms of age, but in terms of time in power. We have President Prabowo came into power on Sunday, a few days back, with a very big cabinet, about 50 full ministers and more than 50 deputies. And then Thailand is quite new, so is Cambodia. Laos is a bit quiet. Myanmar, as we know, is having a big issue, and the Philippines is also very quiet with. And then the Singapore new Prime Minister Lawrence Wong will probably need an election coming up very soon. So we have regional security issues, which we will discuss in detail. Competing interests among ASEAN member states. A few months ago, we had a workshop in our institute discussing whether ASEAN are competitors or they are collaborators, or they are collaborators and competitors at the same time. Because we do not have a common policy like the European Union. We don't have a common foreign policy. We have economic policies, but through the free trade arrangement. We discussed about development gap, a technology war between China and the US, where ASEAN is one of the beneficiaries somehow. We discussed about migration, reglobalization, positioning of ASEAN in the global world, and then, of course, the dispute settlement system, which ASEAN has, but has never been tested, mainly due to the existence of the ASEAN Way. And some of the disputes which we have are being referred somewhere else, like the border disputes are being referred to the ICJ, and the trade disputes are being referred to the WTO. So we have never tested the dispute settlement mechanism within ASEAN. So first we move into the question of ASEAN centrality. These are the framework of ASEAN. We have ASEAN itself, then we have ASEAN +3, and then we have East Asia Summit, and then we have APEC, which 7 of ASEAN member states are members, and then we have ASEAN Europe meeting, and then we have ASEAN Regional Forum. So there are many different layers of involvement of ASEAN with the global world. So the question is, ASEAN would like to have a peaceful, stable, and resilient region with an outward looking, working with the global community. This is what we have been doing mainly through the trade agreements and also with the various framework. But these political security framework are not as effective as free trade agreements because they are just like dialogues, but not really driven by concrete agreement, apart from the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, which are signed by more than 30, 40 countries. So here we are looking into one of the challenges is the great power rivalry between the USA and China. And then the assertiveness of other powers like India and Japan. For example, in South China Sea, both China and the US have their own military naval activities in the area. And then ASEAN member states are being smart. They sometimes have military exercises involving both parties. On one hand, you have issues with China in the South China Sea, but you go having the military exercise with China military. Last week, there was a Navy ship from China came to port into Penang, and it became a big issue. And Anwar Ibrahim said, this is a normal situation. Malaysia accepts anyone who would like to come and dock at our port, so long as they don't have any ulterior motive. And then we have an internal challenge because ASEAN is not a supranational. We do not have a common security and policy, foreign policy. Again, we cannot be compared with the EU, who has its own foreign policy team. Foreign policy for us is very much driven by individual member states. And then we have a growing ambition of ASEAN middle powers of Singapore and Indonesia and Malaysia within and beyond ASEAN. For example, Singapore is very much driving its economic influence through various free trade agreements that they have, not just with ASEAN member states, but also with other countries around the world. And now, Indonesia being G20, they are also looking beyond ASEAN. They are looking into the OECD membership. They are looking into playing the game differently because they are a big economy. And then we have Anwar Ibrahim making a comeback after so many years in politics, almost a prime minister, and then went to jail, and then came back to become the prime minister in 2022. And Anwar is showing his ambition to become a global player, including, I'm sure everyone is aware about Malaysia's intention to join BRICS of all the other organizations. And we have different voices looking into different global challenges like South China Sea. Not everyone is on the same page. Ukraine, same thing. Not everyone is on the same page because some of the ASEAN member states who used to be part of the Soviet sphere, they are still very much into the influence of the Russian politics. Palestinian issue, although it looks like ASEAN is on the same page, but one or two member states may not be fully supportive of the common position. So the biggest voices are Malaysia, Singapore, and Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. And then we have Myanmar, which I will discuss earlier. So within ASEAN and the neighboring countries, we have China, who's like the most powerful in the region. Japan is slowly losing the influence. And we have India, who is becoming more assertive. They want to be respected, although they are still classified as a middle power, but they want to be the next superpower in the region. The rivalry between India and China is slowly affecting us. For example, in the Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership, which is by far the largest FTA in the world, India just pulled out at the last moment on the ground that they do not want to have cheap imports from China. But the actual fact is Modi was not interested to give in to China's influence, and they were trying to set up their own things. Now ASEAN is negotiating a separate enhancement of the free trade agreement between ASEAN and India. And then we have this Indo-Pacific construct, which is quite a strange concept, because for ASEAN, they are still looking into the Asia-Pacific rather than Indo-Pacific. But this is a very much the American way of bringing in their geo-economic influence and geopolitical influence into our region. And at the moment, we are not sure what will happen to us coming to January 2025, because we don't even know who is coming. I mean, no one knows. If, say, Trump becomes the president again, like what happened in the previous presidency, he didn't have much interest in ASEAN. He came to the APEC Leaders Summit in 2020 because it was online. And he was playing on his mobile phone more than paying attention to what was being discussed in that Zoom call. I didn't recall Trump coming in person into any of the ASEAN meeting. He came to Singapore once, and he went to Vietnam just to see Kim Jong-un. Nothing to do with us. He came to our region to see someone else, not to see us. Of course, he had lunch with Lee Hsien Loong in Singapore, but that was like by virtue of having a meeting with Kim Jong-un. Why you need to talk to someone who is not in our region, Talk to us, about us. And I'm not sure what will happen if Kamala Harris wins. Because in the two previous Democratic presidents, we had two different policies. Obama spoke about pivot to Asia. Okay, Obama had a long history and linkage with Asia. His mother came to Indonesia, lived in Indonesia. He went to school in Indonesia. So he still has some linkages in Indonesia. And then we had Biden, who came in with the Indo-Pacific Economic Arrangement and became the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Agreements, with 4 agreements, which he wanted to conclude last year during the American chairmanship of APEC, but it failed because Vietnam and Indonesia couldn't agree on one of the agreements, and it's not going to work. So we wouldn't know what happened because the whole Indo-Pacific construct, as what we know today, started by Trump, and whether Trump would still be keen to go back on the previous concept, where at that time the United States needed India, Japan, and Australia to balance out China. Now, we do not know how they're going to do this. But China is still unhappy about the situation, and ASEAN has been very smart by playing both sides, by saying, look, yes, we agree on Indo-Pacific, but Indo-Pacific is a subset of the Asia-Pacific region. So somehow we are saying, look, if you want to talk to us about Indo-Pacific, you have to come to us as a grouping through the ASEAN centrality, we are happy to speak to you as a dialogue partner, but not as rival. And we are looking for prosperity for everyone. And then the most important thing is respect our territorial integrity in our maritime domain. So in a way, they're telling, look, to the Americans, you have to talk to us, but we are not keen on your Indo-Pacific idea. We are still part of the Asia-Pacific region. To China, yes, we are keen to talk to you, but you have to respect our position on South China Sea. Next issue, I discussed this earlier on development gaps. I think I do not want to go into detail. I've given a copy of my slides to Liana. Maybe you can have a copy later. Technology frontrunner is also, we know the issue about AI, about medical revolution, about digital infrastructure, which ASEAN is keen. And this is one of the areas that we benefit from the rivalry, which is semiconductor. Again, Malaysia and Singapore are the two largest beneficiaries of the semiconductor or the chip war between USA and China. And now, under our chairmanship, ASEAN Chairmanship 2025, semiconductor will be one of the main deliverables for Malaysia and for ASEAN. We will want everybody in ASEAN, the 10 ASEAN member states, to get involved in the semiconductor supply chain. So at the moment, Malaysia and Singapore will be working very closely with Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia. And then we will get the rest of ASEAN to be involved. But this is a long-term plan. For Malaysia, I'm not sure about Singapore. Penang, the semiconductor hub in Southeast Asia, took 60 years to develop the hub. It's not an easy task. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of investment from Intel, Infineon, and all the major semiconductor companies. But what we are worried is this, because of, as we look at the earlier data, most of our trade are with China. And if there's a weakening production or manufacturing of electronic products in China, then we might just lose out. For example, Intel wanted to expand into Penang by building a new factory, and then it decided not to, because it says the weakening of its market position. Infineon also withdrew from one of its factory. They have actually agreed to build a factory. The factory was clearly built in Penang, and then at the last moment they said, we are not moving forward with this. So although we are winning, but there's a lot of uncertainty about demand for the semiconductor or the chip or for the equipment, for the E&E sector around the world. Another angle is if we cannot be choosing who will invest on what and where. So if there are a lot more investment coming from China in the semiconductor industry, is the American government, are they going to be very happy with China-made chips in Malaysia? Will they be imposing the similar restrictions that they are imposing directly on Chinese technology companies in investing into the US? So we are not sure. How are they going to tackle this? Look at what happened to TikTok, for example, right? TikTok in America is, of course, is practically owned by the Chinese parent company, but still is within the domain of the American regulation. And yet they have making a lot of noises on that front. I would like to go into two big issues here. One is the reglobalization and another is Myanmar. So in terms of reglobalization, ASEAN is are very strong players in the WTO. We get involved in various negotiating groups in the WTO. The ASEAN caucus in Geneva is very active. The 10 ASEAN member states always get together. They have an ASEAN caucus. which work together on various issues in the WTO. And then we are also looking into creation of ASEAN value chain. Because of the trade war, because of COVID, we need to have a shorter supply chain and a value chain in ASEAN. So we are looking into creating product space by getting everyone involved, but especially Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and of course Singapore and Philippines are also keen. Another angle which can be quite tricky is this, I do not know what you call it. Some people call it noodle bowl, but maybe noodle, whatever, that nasi, rice. We have so many free trade agreements, but the two big ones which involve some of ASEAN member states is the CPTPP, used to be the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and then which involve the whole of ASEAN, which is the Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership, or RCEP. So it was very unfortunate. At the end of the negotiation, India decided to pull out, purely, as I mentioned earlier, on the ground that they do not want to have any cheap Chinese import into the country. And so one of the my regrets in the RCEP is, I'm not looking into the politics. I'm not looking into the numbers here, but I'm looking into the way ASEAN handled itself. When the parties concluded the agreement, the whole world media came up with Chinese-led Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership. In actual fact, the first step for the agreement was discussed in Cambodia under ASEAN leadership in 2012. But ASEAN was like never been so forthcoming by declaring that this is our effort, this is our thing, this is our child, that we created it with 6 of our dialogue partners to have a big regional cooperation. They just let China claim the credit, or they just let the media to let China to claim the credit. Another angle is, how are we going to reconcile this with whatever agreements that we already have? CPTPP, for example, it involves Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, and Brunei, and then now Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia are also keen, but we have a moratorium of membership, whilst accepting the United Kingdom into the fold. I mentioned to Liana, I've been mentioning this. How on earth, I'm here in the United Kingdom, how on earth the UK has managed to get into a Pacific trade agreement when you are not even part of the Pacific? So that's the unique thing about the networking that the UK has managed to utilize in getting into this, probably the second largest free trade or trade arrangement in the world. Because they have many friends. The main sponsors were Australia and New Zealand, which they had the free trade agreement. And of course, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, being the former colonies, we are more friendly towards the United Kingdom membership. And it also benefits us because we do not have to negotiate and sign a separate agreement with the UK. It will take a long time to have separate agreement. Malaysia tried to have a separate agreement with the EU. It's been going on for like 10 years now, more than 10 years, and has not been concluded. I'm not sure whether it will ever be concluded even. So that's the beauty of this arrangement. The United Kingdom, who is now a dialogue partner, has managed to get into the fold of the Pacific region. And then we have the USA IPEF, which has practically failed. And then we have the EU, who's doing the bilateral with everybody in the region. We have Canada, who's coming so far away and has very little business or trade with ASEAN and is negotiating an ASEAN-Canada FTA. And then we have Russia in APEC. It's very interesting. In the political sphere, the US and Russia are fighting each other, war of words. But in APEC, when I go to the APEC meeting, I sit directly in front of my Russian colleague. So we still talk because it's business, nothing to do with politics. We only talk business. So that's the reality in this Indo-Pacific construct with ASEAN. Okay, then before I move into Myanmar, we have competing interests like G20. Indonesia chaired G20 in 2022, and Indonesia, sometime we think that Indonesia prefers G20 because that really elevates their economic and of course the political economy status in the group of 20 largest economies in the world. And then we have Malaysia, who has actually submitted its application to join BRICS. I wrote an op-ed. I didn't say I'm against BRICS, but I was telling the government, think about it properly. And there are many other advisors or scholars who said the same thing. Now, what Malaysia is doing is, instead of going into the full membership of BRICS, Malaysia is looking into becoming a BRIC partner. This is a new concept called a BRIC partnership, which Malaysia said is more or less like ASEAN plus its dialogue partner. So instead of becoming a full member, Malaysia is saying, well, maybe we should just become friends for a while and see whether we can, whether the organization is suitable for us to join or whether they are willing to accept Malaysia's full membership into the future. We heard about Thailand wanted to join BRICS as well, but there are also contradictory news about the OECD membership. Indonesia has actually made a formal application to join the OECD. Of course, in terms of GDP and GDP per capita, they are still a big way off compared to, say, the latest entrance of Costa Rica. But Indonesia is very keen to join the OECD. Thailand, despite saying that they are keen to join BRICS, they are also keen to join the OECD. And after Anwar Ibrahim mentioned about joining BRICS and joining as BRICS partner, he does not rule out Malaysia joining the OECD as well. The question is whether BRICS will be happy to have an OECD member becoming both in both organizations, or whether the OECD is happy to have a BRIC member within the OECD fold. This is a new concept, new idea which needs to be tested when the time comes. So, but this is nothing negative about it. Everyone is playing the same game. We cannot be saying that because ASEAN does not have a common foreign policy or common security policy, so each member state is entitled to whatever that they want to do. And this is the last point which I would like to discuss, which is Myanmar crisis. As I mentioned, I started in Myanmar in 2012, and then I left the project ended in 2020 because we couldn't go forward after the coup d'etat in 2021. All these are my own pictures. The elephant in the room is literally that elephant is in Naypyidaw, is chained to facing the pagoda. So the place, the shed where they put the elephant is facing that pagoda. Myanmar joined ASEAN in 1997 is part of an effort, nothing to do with economy, part of an effort to bring everyone into the fold, to neutralize and to help Myanmar overcome the problems and to somehow try to reduce the tension in the region, because Myanmar has been having a very long civil war within various groups since obtaining independence in 1946. It experimented with democracy a bit from the election in 2012 onwards, and then the full election in 2015, 2016, and then the coup d'etat. Despite the election, the Constitution of Myanmar retained 25% membership, compulsory membership of parliament to the military. So whatever you want to say, whatever Aung San Suu Kyi wanted to do, she still needed to have an agreement from the military because they had 25% shares in the parliament. So this is a big test for ASEAN because we have our reputation to resolve the problems. And Myanmar is very important because it has oil and gas, and with the move towards semiconductor and EV, they also have a lot of rare earth minerals, critical minerals, and at the moment is very much dominated by Chinese mining companies. Agriculture and fisheries, two of their main producers as well. They export a lot of rice and fish. They supply low labor costs. But they also they have a lot of professionals as well, which are based in Malaysia, in Singapore, engineers, doctors. They are very highly skilled. They speak good English. And then they connect India and China, the landlocked parts of India and China, to the sea, to the Indian Ocean, especially to China. We can see the pipeline from Sittwe in Rakhine State to Kunming, and also Japan has a lot of interest in the region by investing in the Tilawa, which is the largest exclusive economic zone in Myanmar. I travel around the state, the country in my work in the country. But even then, I saw the remnants of, or still the tension. Cayenne State, for example, is one of those who are involved in the civil war. In 2017, I went to the capital, Pa'an. I saw every kilometer you see the bunker. So it's still there. It was peaceful time. We had Ramadan breaking fast at the mosque in Pa'an. In my travel, I always take pictures because I am not sure when will I come back again. I serve in difficult places on earth. I went to Myanmar. I served in Timor-Leste, in Laos, in the Pacific Islands. So I always keep pictures because I will never know when will I come back to these places. In Leh Lake, very peaceful, and that was the last engagement we had before the COVID, and then during the COVID, we had a lot of discussion online, hoping to come back to Myanmar after the COVID, and then that's it. We closed. No more. World Bank withdrew, the United Nations all gone. So it's a sad case. So ASEAN agreed on 5 consensus, which I think is very difficult for the Myanmar military government. One is the immediate cessation of violence. Violence happened on both ways, and violence has been happening for a long time. It's not just because of the coup d'etat. So Aung San Suu Kyi tried to bring everybody into the negotiating room under the Pahlong arrangement, but it took a long time for her as well. ASEAN proposed for a constructive dialogue. It's very difficult because if you speak to the junta, the NLD government in exile will say no. If you speak to the NLD government in exile, the junta will say no, nothing happened. Special envoy will never happen because you need to speak to the junta. And most of the special envoys appointed so far had no clue and no direct linkages with the junta government. Humanitarian assistance is very difficult to get into as well, especially in Rakhine. I was advising the government. I tried to go into Rakhine in my capacity as investment policy designer, and they said no, I cannot go. So I've never been to Rakhine state myself because I needed a special permission and I was refused permission. So our hands are tied because of the non-interference policy. But we are talking to Myanmar from the perspective of human rights and respect for international law. They do come to meetings. They do send meetings. In the imminent person group, they come. We have deputy ministers level. But we don't speak about that particular elephant. It's always about what is going to happen next without addressing the issue directly in the imminent person group, directly in the committees. And the best way for us to do is to avoid talking about it by persuading Myanmar not to become the chair after Malaysia. By right, they should be the chair in 2026. So somehow or rather, they managed to persuade Myanmar to give in to the Philippines in 2026. Because it will be a very awkward position to have a chair who is not a chair. Because we will not allow the junta government to personally chair the meetings. And there's no provision for expulsion or withdrawal in the ASEAN Charter. No way. We never talk about getting someone out of the organization. You can come in, you can never get out. This is like Hotel California or Hotel ASEAN, you may call it. And there is a perceived non-consensus among ASEAN member states. I would not name names, but we know some of ASEAN are not so democratic, so they are worried about the non-interference policy be turned against them. So this is a test, because not just the junta who is non-democratic. Many other ASEAN member states are also not democratically elected. They do not have democratic government. So this is if we start using the interference policy, then other member states can also start telling one or two of the member states that, look, you need to change. You need to change the way you do things. So it's a big challenge for us. However, there are opportunities going on. At the moment, they are facing pressure from the ethnic armed groups like the People's Defense Forces or what happened in the Shan state as well. Neighbors are not happy because China cannot get their oil properly transferred. They cannot. Their plan to build a railway between Sittwe and Kunming also failed. Thailand is having problem because every time they have bombs or fightings along the border, people run away into Thailand, even to Malaysia or Indonesia now. India is facing the same thing. Japan, they lost a lot of money because of their investment in Tilawa and other areas. Russia, somehow, they have been like playing. It used to be China that played the most important power behind the scene. But now, the junta for some time moved closer to Russia, but now they are going back to China. So I'm not sure how they are going to play with this game. But what we need is to coordinate efforts for humanitarian relief and facilitate dialogues. And I think Malaysia's experience in helping the transition or helping resolving the previous problems through Ambassador Razali Ismail and Foreign Minister Hamid Alba would also help in the sense that we had the experience, we know how to mediate between the parties. Another person who was involved was Retno Marsudi, the former now former Indonesian foreign minister, but she has actually left the government. So I'm not sure how Malaysia is going to lead this discussion in 2025. So moving forward, we have a lot of things which we discuss today in this 40 minutes discussion. So we need to address the development gap. All this, I think, I do not need to repeat. But the biggest issue is, of course, how do we address the dynamic regional challenges, global challenges which have direct impact on ASEAN, like what is going to happen in the US, whoever is becoming the next president, and how are we going to talk to China, telling them like, look, don't disturb our fisheries and also oil and gas activities in South China Sea. Many years ago in 2017, I remember I was here in the UK as part of the group to discuss about the decision, the arbitration decision over the Chinese and the Philippines case, the UNCITRAL tribunal case. And the discussion was not, it's still stuck in my mind. It was not something that I would want to sit in again. The discussion was turning into very undiplomatic among the diplomats. And sometimes it was quite an ugly situation in the closed door discussion here in the UK. But most importantly, although this is a rhino, but I don't know, this is the problem with AI. They cannot read the rhino and the elephant. I told them to put in the elephant, but we had to address the elephants in the room, although the AI says it's rhino. Maybe that's the thinking of ASEAN as well. We told them, look, we have to address the elephant in the room, but they think it's only a rhino. So that's how it is. We are facing this problem coming up. Thank you very much.
So before opening up to broader questions, let me just frame one or two small points. One thing that strikes me as interesting is that ASEAN as an organization is often far more effective than many people outside ASEAN would assume it should be or would be. Yeah. Right? It persistently surprises many, many observers around the world. And maybe it's in the sort of a sweet spot. Perhaps. So in a sense, the BRICS, which were mentioned a few times, every time I hear about the BRICS, I think they're a few bricks short of a load, basically, because it's not really an organization. It doesn't do anything. These are random countries grouped together. And now we even have briquettes that are going to be attached on the outside of this. It's not ever going to do anything, it seems. But then at the other extreme, you have something like the European Union, and especially the Eurozone, which is so all-encompassing that it also has trouble retaining people within it. Right? People are leaving the European Union, like this country did, because it is too all-encumbering. And many countries have chafed under the euro, as Greece did, for example, and Ireland, Portugal, et cetera, all encountered problems with the euro in 2009. So maybe ASEAN is in this sort of a sweet spot between the more all-encumbering sort of international organization and the one that's really too thin to do anything whatsoever. A second point that I would raise just very briefly, you mentioned in your talk correctly that China is the most important trading partner for ASEAN now overall. But what's also true, and important to mention, I think, because oftentimes people haven't realized this in many parts of the world, ASEAN surpassed the Eurozone as China's most important trading partner a few years ago, right? So not only is China important to ASEAN, ASEAN is actually vitally important to China, at least when it comes to international trade. And one thing that strikes me as interesting about this huge and diverse region that is ASEAN is that while as a group, none of the countries of ASEAN can escape an economic relationship with China, right? They all need an economic relationship with China. They all benefit from an economic relationship with China. China needs an economic relationship with them. They have vastly different views on security relations with China, right? So if we take, for example, Cambodia versus the Philippines, there's almost nothing they would agree on in terms of security views towards China or the proper role for in security terms of China in the region. And so I wonder, is that a challenge in some way, either to ASEAN unity or to cooperation more broadly between ASEAN member states when it comes to dealing with China? That they're on such different pages when it comes to security, even though they're all sort of bound together by this economic tie, which is indeed increasingly important for most of them. And the last thing I'll mention is then with regard to the South China Sea, right? Again, in the South China Sea, there are vastly different perceptions, right? For some, maybe it's just about oil and gas or fisheries, but for many ASEAN member states, it's an existential issue. China similarly views this as a matter of territorial waters. And then you have outside powers, including the United States, but not only the United States, who are saying this is international waters and freedom of navigation and so on, which is actually the position of most of the ASEAN member states when it comes to most of the South China Sea as well. So is there any hope of coordination around this when hanging over it is this larger issue of how does one deal in security terms with China? What is the proper role for the United States? I mean, Obama and his pivot to Asia never happened, right? What he actually did was take troops out of Japan, right? That was the main impact of the pivot to Asia. Trump pulled out of every place that he could. Biden has not focused on East Asia, Southeast Asia really at all, except to forge tighter security alliances in Northeast Asia, right, with Korea and Japan. But there's been no focus, I think, on Southeast Asia. Obama, very sadly, never even visited until nearly the end of his term. And then only once, if I remember correctly, did he visit Southeast Asia, and not for a very long time. So I think that there just hasn't been the engagement. We have no idea what will happen if Harris wins. But I'm not convinced that the US will engage in broader terms with the region. And given that, and given the security tension, is there a way to manage, in particular, the South China Sea issue, but broader security issues as well? Actually, and then the very final thing I would add is that, yes, right now there's this issue around Myanmar and non-interference. Of course, it is worth remembering in terms of military governments, right? In the early days of ASEAN being put together, right? I mean, Indonesia and the Philippines still had military governments as that was going on, right? As did other countries around the region. And today, obviously, there are many member states that are not exactly fully democratic. But this tradition of military regimes, Thailand is frequently under a military government, for example. And that's a core ASEAN member state, right? So it becomes very difficult to sort of manage that. And I don't know if it's just about non-interference, but it's about also, I think, defining what sort of government is beyond the pale, right? If any junta is out of bounds for including within ASEAN, well, how come all of these Thai military governments were in the middle of ASEAN all the time? For example, not only Thailand, not just to pick on Thailand, but it seems difficult to draw that line when there's so many instances in which it would have to move to accommodate someone. Likewise, with anything of non-democracy or what is a real democracy or a backsliding, it becomes a slippery slope, basically, to saying we can't really incorporate anyone into this conversation. So let me stop there. Let me give you a chance to respond briefly to that, and then we'll take questions from the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think let's go first on the question of non-interference. Because we started as a loose organization in 1967, it was not even an international organization as what it is today. So it has always been it's not a pure integration project, right? It's just the people getting together because they were so worried about the security issue. Malaysia at that point of time just had issues with the Philippines and Indonesia because of the formation of the new country. And then the economic project only started in the 90s. It's just like 30 years later, more than 25 years later. So we always have this separation of internal matters from the organization itself. So that's why when they negotiated the ASEAN Charter, they put in that non-interference, because whatever I do is my own thing. But we can come together and be friends, do our own things at our own pace, in our own way, and finding a consensus on as many areas as possible through the ASEAN way. It's very difficult to, I agree with you, very difficult to define what is meant by democratic government, what is meant by the most ideal government in our region, because we come from different background. We were British colonies, they were also French colonies, they were also American, Spanish colony, they were also like Dutch, not just in Indonesia. Some parts were like more complicated. So it's better that we do not want, it's better not to define anything. Just let it be. But we must find a common elements, or what we call it, core elements within the project. Okay, China. We cannot do away with China. It's just our neighbor. Maybe for Europe it's a bit far away, but for us, it's not just about trade. It's about historical linkages as well. Some of us are from China, technically. My great-grandparents came from China. But by way of definition, we are not Chinese, by way of constitutional definition. But practically, we had linkages in China. So it's beyond economics, cultural. The early comers, the early migration, few hundred years ago, it was totally different. But the second or third migration in the late 19th century, early 20th century, they had more affinity with China. But in terms of culture, when we went to China, the Chinese in China are saying, look, you are not Chinese. For us, yes, we have some thought, okay, we are still Chinese, we have some linkages, historical. But for them, we are just Malaysian, we are just Singaporean. But economically, you cannot separate us from China. Even if, say, the linkages is so strong, if we stop exporting things to China, China will collapse. That's how it is. I mean, I put it in that the Chinese economy will collapse because they still need the intermediate goods from our part of the world to China. Okay, sorry.
And food.
Yeah, and food, yes.
Then a desperate
Yeah. And food, South China Sea, the conflict in South China Sea is not just about oil. It's about food. It has one of the largest fish stock in the world. And they need us to export to China. So I will not answer the first question. How do we resolve the issues? Maybe for us to discuss. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So now let's open up the floor to any questions or points from the audience.
We need the microphone.
Taka first.
PhD student Center of Development Studies. So my question is on the ASEAN centrality, because you mentioned like now, if you look at each ASEAN country, there are more close relations with Chinese component China economically. So I think in my sense, when it comes to the economic dimensions, ASEAN centrality doesn't look really fit the current situation in each ASEAN country. Like obviously Indonesia had a huge amount of investment from Chinese companies, and other Vietnam, other part of the other countries in ASEAN as well. So, But when it comes to, I think, a security issue, I think ASEAN centrality still maybe work somehow. They kind of try to be a neutral position in between the China and the US, for instance. So my question is, do you think it's given that the situation in the like a kind of rivalry situation between like China and the US, is ASEAN centrality is still inclusive term, both like economic and security, or do you think it has to be more like be changing over the like a changing situation and over the last decade? So that's my question. Thank you.
Maybe we'll take one more question as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, so early in the presentation, you've definitely mentioned the ASEAN way of doing things and the no interference policy. But I was thinking with the issues like the ones in Myanmar, do you think there should be a reform or a change in the no interference policy, because perhaps this could lead to better cooperation between countries in preventing humanitarian crises if ASEAN members could enforce policies onto other members?
I don't get your last. Can you speak louder?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I was saying, my question is, do you think there should be a reform or a change in the no interference policy, because perhaps this could lead to better cooperation between ASEAN members if they could implement policies onto each other?
Okay. The first question on ASEAN centrality in economic issues. I think the question of ASEAN centrality started with the political security, right? Of the positioning. If you look at the different programs like ASEAN Europe meeting is purely political security. ASEAN Regional Forum, same thing. Then we have but the one that is moving beyond political security is ASEAN +3 and ASEAN +6. So that's where we have the Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership. That is the key to show the seriousness of ASEAN centrality in driving the trade, investment, economic agenda in the region. But unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, ASEAN also failed to claim the credit for that effort. It took many years to negotiate such an agreement. Although it's not as highest, quote and unquote, high standard of the TPP or the CPTPP, but it took into account the uniqueness of all 10 member states. You cannot be imposing a state-owned enterprise chapter in RCEP because Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, even Malaysia, for example, cannot fully comply. China has so many state-owned enterprises, so it will never happen. So that has been taken out. And now, beyond RCEP, we are looking into upgrading of some of the ASEAN +3 agreements. So next year, or in the Laos chairmanship this year, we see the conclusion of ASEAN China upgrading, and then coming up the ASEAN India upgrading, and then ASEAN is moving beyond the the ASEAN +6. It goes. We are having ASEAN GCC plus China. They are doing the cost and benefit analysis, the feasibility study on ASEAN GCC, and then Malaysia insisted that we are going to have the ASEAN GCC plus China, because China is also having a lot of interest now in the GCC area. So ASEAN wants to be seen as driving the economic collaboration beyond ASEAN. So that is my straightforward answer to your question about ASEAN centrality in the economic sector. On your question about, sorry,
non-interference.
Non-interference.
Basically, should there be some sort of enforcement or some teeth to ASEAN to compel member states to change politically or to follow certain kinds of rules or guidelines? Might that actually make ASEAN stronger? Is that a fair interpretation of your question?
I find it very difficult to answer that question, because ASEAN non-interference is purely non-interference on how you elect your government, how you govern your country, how you do things. But when we had our discussion within closed door, right? There are things that sometimes we think like, why not? We are looking at things from different perspective. Like, for example, if you interfere, if you have problems with human rights in your country, and that problem, the human rights issue, affect us. Say, for example, straight to the point, right, the issue of Myanmar. Because of the violation, not just the Rohingya, but other ethnic groups too, they run away. They become refugees. They become, in our part of the world, we don't sign, we are not parties to the United Nations Convention of Refugees. So they become illegals. And how do you treat illegals? So what we are saying, look, we need to interfere, because whatever you do in your country, so long as it does not affect us, we are fine. You confine within your four walls. But the moment it affects us, we have the right to, not to interfere, we have the right to tell you something. We don't use the word interference, but we have the right to demand some action on those issues. Blatant disregard of international law is also provided for in the ASEAN Charter. So I think we need to revisit the ASEAN Charter somehow, trying to redefine what is meant by non-interference, and then say, look, it's not interference, but rather is a kind of helping you to resolve your problems, human rights issues, disregard of international law. But whatever fighting you have with your own ethnic groups within your border, that's not my problem. But the moment you touch me because of your issues, then I should have the right. This is what we are telling Myanmar officials in the meetings. Of course, they defend their position, but we're telling them, look, yes, we understand, but you have to respect our position too. Malaysia, for example, has more than 150,000 quote and unquote refugees, because we are not a party to the United Nations Convention on Refugees, from Myanmar. Not just Rohingya, we have people from Shan, we have people from Chin area, so many ethnic groups. Even Indonesia now is facing the issue. They land in Aceh, and they become victims of human smugglers. So this is where we are coming in. We are not saying that we are not interfering. We are saying that we are not interfering because the moment they get involved in human smuggling, that is our problem. They purposely go to Aceh because they know if they land in Langkawi, they are going the Malaysians will put them into the detention, the immigration detention camp. So they purposely go to Aceh because there are people smugglers among their own people who will smuggle them into Malaysia through what we call it Jalan Tikus or whatever, the illegal way, the illegal routes, different parts of Malaysia. So I was saying in the meetings, we needed to have a relook, but of course it will take a long time if ever there's a consensus on having a relook at the ASEAN Charter.
I know there's at least one more question on the floor. Let's take all four of these very quickly because we are beginning to run short of time. So we'll just go across from my right to left.
Yeah, I have a question. Given that this talk happens in a university and you are a professor of international trade and investment, I would like you to reflect a little bit on the role of academics in these negotiations. What role do you see that academics play, but also to which extent is there a risk to academics being weaponized by other conflicts? So maybe you could reflect a little bit on your own experience and share that with us.
Okay, and then we have 3 others.
Hi. My question is, if it doesn't have much teeth, is there a way, like in the European Union, for example, where you can, is there like a pot of money that you can give to each other? I'm not too familiar with ASEAN, admittedly, but is there a pot of money that you can do when you say help each other develop or whatever? And is there a way to make it more effective, perhaps? Yeah, that's my question.
Is there money that ASEAN can dispense to member states to incentivize them to do something if they cannot be forced?
Yeah, I'm Mikael Vigel. I'm visiting scholar here with the Center for Geopolitics, normally at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. I'm not very familiar with ASEAN. I wonder, because in Europe and the US, the concept of economic security has become very prominent, and as a consequence, our economic policy making is changing very, very rapidly and very heavily. A lot of focus on sort of the industrial policy has made a return, investment screening, export controls, the whole lot. I also understand that in Japan and South Korea, economic security is a prominent concept these days as well. Japan has a new ministry with a focus on economic security, and it's a lot about de-risking from China, economically de-risking from China, right? Is there a similar kind of elevation of economic security in the ASEAN countries as well? Is that also on the agenda very prominently there? Thanks.
Okay, and there's one last one all the way in the back corner there.
Yeah, so my question is, recently, because of the idea of green development, you see a lot of ASEAN states converging in ideas and how they develop. So to give an example, you have Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia both focusing a lot on electric vehicles manufacturing and wanting to be a next EV hub. So do you think this sort of convergence in ideas is likely to increase the competition within ASEAN, making it harder for ASEAN integration? Or do you think it will be an advantage to have the ASEAN integration for these states to compete on that same level of convergence?
Great, thank you very much. So 4 questions and
Very quickly.
very quickly, yes.
All right, thank you. The role of academics. I think, all right, I'm based at the university, but I do not come originally from the academic world. So I was called in by the government and they put me at the university. So we do a lot of, at our institute at least, we do a lot of academic works which then help the government or ASEAN to translate their policy. There are a lot of institutes or research institutes in ASEAN that work on this basis. There's one regional economic research institute called the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area, which is an international organization. And they established the Research Institute Network consisting of 16 research institutions in ASEAN, and we get together every year to discuss issues, and we do write academic papers which then will be brought up to the policies. So I'm a kind of hybrid person in the sense that I sit in the government, I sit in the meetings, I sit in the eminent person group, but we do have consultation. Say for example, in the coming up to 2025, we had been having so many consultations with the academic world. They send in their papers. But sometimes they find it difficult because, like you mentioned, you don't understand ASEAN. I'm not surprised because there are a lot of people who in ASEAN who do not understand the organization itself. It's such an intricate organization. But we do get opinions and support from the academia, especially on data, on more and more people are writing PhDs on ASEAN on various topics, not just economics, on migration, on political security and things. I'm very encouraged by this development. Right, and then on the question of funding, ASEAN is in a very difficult situation because most of the programs that we run in ASEAN are funded by development partners. Say, for example, in coming up to 2025, we have to do a lot of programs, and we have to seek support, financial and expertise from other parts of the world. On certain issues, we have a lot of development partners. The World Bank, for example, they come and work on climate change, on social protection and other issues. Japan, they work on certain things. Australia is a big supporter. They have a specific program called AADCP, ASEAN Australia Development Cooperation Program, based in the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta. They have an office embedded in the ASEAN Secretariat. They've been running this for the past 15 from my memory, at least 15 years. I was first involved in 2012 years, about 15 years now. And they have been spending billions. So without the external funding and external expertise, I think ASEAN would not have been able to work on various initiatives that they are having now. So it's very difficult to get ASEAN member states to actually fund projects because the funding is given on equal basis. So some member states, the richest member states will not necessarily contribute more. Everyone pays the same amount of contribution to the ASEAN Secretariat. It's not like the UN, they pay different rates. So that's the issue. We try in our eminent person group to actually come up with alternatives, but this issue has been on the table for a long time. It will never change. Not yet. I don't think it will change in the next few years to come. All right. Economic agenda. Now, the most famous group in ASEAN is the ASEAN Economic Community. Although originally ASEAN started as a political security organization, but since 1990s until today, maybe into the future, most of the issues that we discuss are mainly economic. The most concrete plans that happen and implemented are mainly economically driven by the economic community groups. And like I mentioned, it was also supported by external parties. So moving up to 2025, I have seen the draft of the Economic Community Strategic Plan. It's like hundreds of different initiatives coming up compared to the political security and the socio-cultural group. So it's becoming very prominent in the ASEAN community. ASEAN competition, yes, this is a big issue. We had a discussion earlier in our institute about whether ASEAN are competitors or collaborators. To a certain extent, we have the terms called ASEAN as a single investment destination, ASEAN as a single production base, ASEAN as a single tourism destination. Those are the terms in our plans, in the economic plans. However, they compete very well among each other. Say, for example, in the AI, everyone wants to get Google to come. Everyone wants to get Microsoft to come. So what these companies are doing, they are being very smart. They divide and rule. So, okay, I give you some, I give another person another $1, I give another person $20, so they get incentives from everybody. So they divide, the companies take part in, and they decide on what to do with different member states. So they compete very well. But some of the competition are good because in some of the industries, say for example, Malaysia or Singapore, we may not want the industry to be based in our countries anymore. So we would be happy if they move, happy means quote and unquote, if they move to Vietnam, because we want a higher level or higher technology companies to come and invest in our part. So indirectly, it helps. Yes, you compete, but it helps to create more. It helps to create creativity in incentives, and it helps to create some kind of awareness that if you don't back up, someone will take whatever that you have, or someone or investors will go to some other member states.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And we now have a drinks reception waiting for us in the next room. So thank you and good night.
Yeah.